Now, this story is one of the most evil stories you would ever come across. So this man goes by the name Steven. He's from Kenya and he happens to be a billionaire businessman. He had a 100-acre land which is as big as 16 football fields, and on this land he had a banana plantation farm, a fish farm, a tea farm, and also many other crops there. And from time to time, he supplied production companies and factories all over Kenya with his farm products. Steven wasn't only into agriculture, he was also into real estate. He had Airbnbs, hotels, and gas stations scattered all over Kenya. And through all these ventures, including his farm, he was able to acquire huge wealth, and this was how he became a billionaire. And everything seemed to be going fine for him. Now, one thing that is worth mentioning in this story is that on that Steven 100-acre farmland, he also had a mansion in there. And allegedly, it was on this mansion that he mainly lived, making it easy for him to monitor his workers that were always working for him on his farm. Now, like most big African businessmen, Steven got married to multiple women that ended up giving him a total of 9 children. And one of the children is this guy named Daniel. According to reports, Daniel happened to be the last born son of Steven, and he was his favorite son. While growing up, Steven granted whatever wish Daniel requested for. He spoiled him rotten, and as a result of this, Daniel grew up loving Steven and wanting to be like him. So, as soon as Daniel graduated from the university, he followed his father's footsteps and ventured into the same line of business as him, which is agriculture and real estate. He set up a poultry farm and established a hotel, and little by little, he began making money for himself as well. Eventually, he got enough money and then built a house for himself beside his father's mansion on that same 100 acres land. A few years later, Daniel got married to this woman called Farida. They began living together in his newly built house, and soon after, she gave birth to 2 beautiful daughters. And for a while, everything seemed to be going well for Daniel, his wife Farida, and also his father Steven. Until one day. Now that day happened to be the 1st of January at around 8 a.m. Some of Steven's workers came to the farm as usual to begin work. However, to their surprise, as soon as they entered through the gate of the farm, they saw something they weren't expecting to see. Daniel's body was lying lifeless beside the gate, soaked in a pool of blood. The workers seeing this were shocked by the gruesome discovery, and immediately they contacted Mr. Steven and reported the news to him. Mr. Steven, who had been attending a New Year's Eve celebration, quickly rushed back home, and upon arrival, he saw his son's lifeless body on the ground, and he immediately burst into tears. Moments later, the police arrived on the scene, and then they began investigating. Now, while investigating, the police discovered that Daniel's wallet was untouched, his phone was still in his pocket, his house door was not broken, and even his car was still inside the building in good condition. Now, after witnessing all this, the police came to the conclusion that this wasn't the case of armed robbery or anything like that. Rather, it was a murder for hire case. That is, the person or people who unalived Daniel were paid to do so. So, in order to uncover the identity of the person or the people responsible for Daniel's death, the police began interrogating some of the workers in the farm and also Daniel's family members so as to find out if Daniel had any enemies. Now, through this interrogation, the police learned that Daniel, his wife Farida, and also his dad Steven were always having issues. Even a few weeks before his death, they had an even bigger fight. Now, with this newfound information, the police then decided to interrogate Mr. Steven, aka Daniel's father, and ask him what was always causing their issues. However, when they asked these questions to Mr. Steven, he told them that they were just having casual issues, and that even though they were having issues, that wouldn't make him end the life of his son. After hearing all this, the police decided to interrogate someone else, and that someone was Mr. Steven's personal assistant. They made this decision to see if assistants would say anything different from what Mr. Steven had said, or maybe even give them a solid lead that would help them solve the case once and for all. However, when the police began searching for assistants, he was nowhere to be found. He hadn't shown up to work in a while, and some co-workers hadn't even seen him. The police then went to his house, but he was still missing, and so they launched a large-scale manhunt so as to apprehend assistants, and eventually, within a couple of days, they eventually tracked him down to a remote location in a different community and then arrested him. After assistant's arrest, the police began interrogating him. They wanted to know who was responsible for the death of Daniel. Now at first, assistant tried to act as if he knew nothing, but after a few drilling sessions, he eventually confessed to the police what really happened to Daniel. And believe me when I say you won't see this coming. Now you see, before Daniel's death and the whole investigation, Daniel and his wife used to have issues. Their issues were basically all these normal issues couples do have. However, the main problem with these issues was that whenever they had them, Daniel's wife would go report to Daniel's father, Mr. Steven, and then Mr. Steven would take Daniel's wife's side in the case and attack Daniel verbally. This kept on going on for a while. Whenever they had little issues, Farida, or should I say Daniel's wife, would run to Daniel's father and report, and then Daniel's father would start insulting Daniel. It even got to a point where Daniel's wife, Farida, packed her things one day and moved into Mr. Steven's home, that is Daniel's father, and was now living together with him as if they were a married couple. He was taking her out for shopping, he opened a business for her, he was buying her expensive gifts. And when Daniel saw all of this, he got really angry. He felt that his own father had corrupted and stolen Farida from him, and that he was the force behind their regular issues. So one day, Daniel confronted him about it publicly. He attacked him and revealed to everyone at the gas station where they were that his father had stolen his wife from him and he had been living with her. As a matter of fact, on that day, he was this close to beating up his father, Mr. Steven. Now after this altercation settled down, Steven felt so belittled and embarrassed of Daniel's action for washing his dirty lining in public, and so right there and there he decided to unalive Daniel. So Mr. Steven contacted his assistant and told him to arrange some boys to unalive Daniel, that he would pay the sum of 160,000 Kenyan shilling or 600,000 naira to them. The assistant then immediately contacted one of his friends who is a car seller and told him he needed 2 people to carry out a job for him. The car seller, not knowing that this job was a murder job, then linked assistant to these 2 guys who I would call Killer 1 and 2. Assistant then briefed Killer 1 and 2 on the job he wanted them to do. He showed them the house of Daniel and also showed them Daniel and told them how much they will be receiving for carrying out the job successfully. And you know, Killer 1 and 2 easily accepted this offer. So on the 31st night, Killer 1 and Killer 2 hid inside Daniel's compound and waited for him to return back after celebrating the crossover night. And as expected, Daniel returned home at around 3 a.m. on the 1st of January. Now as soon as he entered the compound with his car and then went to lock the gate, Killer 1 and Killer 2 attacked him with a metal rod and knife, unaliving him in the process. When they were done unaliving him, they then called assistants and told him that they had completed the job. Assistants then relayed the message to Mr. Steven, and then Mr. Steven paid them the sum of 160,000 Kenyan shilling for a job well done. So, in other words, Mr. Steven was behind the death of his own son. After assistant confessed all this, he was arrested. His own wife was arrested on charges of aiding and abetting him. Mr. Steven was arrested. The car seller guy that linked Killer 1 and Killer 2 to assistant was arrested, and also Killer 1 and 2 were arrested as well, and they were all charged to court. In court, assistant's wife was released because it was later revealed that she knew nothing about the whole crime, nor did she aid assistant in committing the crime. Car seller was also released as well for the same reason as assistant's wife. Meanwhile, Killer 1 was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Killer 2 was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Mr. Steven died in jail before he could be sentenced due to his diabetic illness, and then assistant was sentenced to only 2.5 years in prison, and the reason was because he aided the police in the investigation by confessing and revealing what really happened. So he was given a lighter sentence, which is just 2 years. Follow me for more crazy stories. I'm Caleb and I've uncovered this case.